Alumni Fellow Candidate Town Hall. We're really happy to host Victor Ashe from the Yale College class of 1967 and Maggie Thomas from the Forestry and Environmental Studies class of 2015 as they campaign for the Yale Corporation. Before we jump into getting to know each of the candidates, I thought it would be nice to provide a brief overview of the election process and the election itself. As you probably know, the Yale Corporation is made up of the president and 16 trustees or board members. 10 of these trustees are successor trustees, meaning they're appointed by current members of the board. The other 6 are what are called alumni fellows, and they serve staggered 6-year terms. Of these alumni fellows, 1 is elected each and every spring, with the general body of alumni having a choice between the 2 candidates that are proposed by members of the corporation. And voters make their choice between those candidates on the basis of a photo and a very short blurb of information. In order to make it onto a ballot, outside candidates have to collect several thousand signatures, 4,394 to be precise, from Yale alumni. And this town hall is a way for the Yale Club of Fort Worth to introduce 2 candidates to the local alumni community and to spread their visions for the future of Yale. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Maggie and Victor for some brief introductions. Maggie, I'll turn it over to you first for a brief introduction of your background, relationship to Yale, and what you hope to accomplish as a successor trustee.
Great. Thank you so much, Declan and other members of the Yale Club of Fort Worth. It's exciting to be here with you all. I am zooming in, as they say, from Sacramento, California, where I just relocated from Somerville, Massachusetts. So I just made a cross-country drive, which is what you probably heard us talking about it right at the beginning. But like I said, my name's Maggie. I graduated from the Yale School of the Environment, just renamed from the Yale School of Forestry in 2015. I spent the last year working on 2 different presidential campaigns. So first for Governor Jay Inslee, you may remember him as the candidate who talked a lot about climate change. And then second, I was the climate policy advisor to Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign. I'm running for the Yale Corporation as a representative of an organization called Yale Forward, which is a coalition of alumni, students, and faculty who believe that Yale is falling behind in its response to the climate crisis because our governance is not representative of our diverse alumni community. My hope is that the campaign will motivate the university to give greater voice to recent alumni in its governance and establish Yale as a moral and academic leader in the fight for a healthier, more just, and more sustainable future. You all live in Texas, so I don't need to tell you about climate change. Between extreme heat and widespread flooding and more severe hurricanes, you know what it's to be on the front lines of climate change. Yale has a responsibility to be a leader in this fight. After all, the university's motto is for Yale to be committed to improving the world today and for future generations. Yale should strive to be the future that we want to see. And I'm running a petition to get on the ballot of the Yale Corporation because it's time to reform the Yale Corporation and bring in more young and diverse voices to the Board of Trustees. I'm well aware that no candidate has been elected via petition since William Horvitz in 1965, when he became the first Jewish trustee in Yale's history, adding religious diversity to the corporation for the first time. Nevertheless, now is the time to stand for change and do our part to move Yale forward. All of the current trustees graduated from Yale at least 18 years ago, and the makeup of the corporation does not presently reflect the rich diversity of our global alumni body. Men currently outnumber women, for example, by nearly 2 to 1. Yale's restrictive system of governance disenfranchises college alumni for their first 5 years following their graduation and makes it difficult for new ideas and voices to be introduced to the Board of Trustees. Given the enormous changes that our community has experienced over the last several decades, I believe that the board's decision-making processes will be strengthened by formally including input and perspectives of recent alumni. To do this, the board must first establish and modernize avenues for direct communication with the Yale community. In doing so, we will carry the great legacy of our institution forward long into the future. So I hope you'll join us.
Excellent. Thank you, Maggie. Victor, I'll turn it over to you for your opening.
Well, thank you very much, Declan. It's a pleasure to join again with Maggie. We've been before the Michigan Yale Club and the Naples Yale Club, and now Fort Worth, and we're available for other Yale clubs across not just the United States, but in other countries, of which there are many. It's a pleasure to be here. And you know, the interesting thing is you heard Maggie discuss some issues, and I'll be discussing some issues, but this is a discussion that only Maggie and I will discuss. Because once, if we both get on the ballot, or one of us, the Yale Corporation candidates put up through the Yale Alumni Committee, their nominating committee, are prohibited from discussing or telling you anything about what they believe in. So they will not participate in a future forum such as the Yale Club of Fort Worth is having if we're both on the ballot come April of 2021. That's unfortunate. But I would say this, a candidate who is unwilling to share his or her views with you is not worthy of your vote. And it's really, you know, it's contrary to the principles of a great university where robust discussion should be the order of the day, not hiding behind a bio, which may show that you've been successful in your profession, but says nothing about what you believe in or what you like to accomplish should you have the high privilege of serving on the Yale Corporation. In my own background, I think I'm particularly well qualified, particularly not only do I serve in our state legislature, both the House and the Senate, starting at the tender age of 23, being elected, but also serving as mayor of my city and president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And as mayor of my city, environmental issues were one of the hallmarks of my 16 years, having added 41 miles of greenways to our system, having tripled our park acreage throughout the city of Knoxville, having taken parks to the predominantly African-American part of our city, which had been neglected for previous mayoral administrations, and also through my membership in the U.S. Conference of Mayors and 1 year being president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, supporting environmental issues at the national level. Also, having been mayor of the city, Knoxville's the home of the flagship campus, the University of Tennessee. So as a result, I dealt with town gown issues regularly. In fact, every other month I had coffee, breakfast, lunch, or something with the then president of the University of Tennessee. In fact, I went through 4 of them during my 16 years. But what I'm saying is, I think that gives me, if I am a member of the corporation, some background in dealing with the Yale New Haven issues, which are frankly exist all the time. Almost any large university has some issue. Yale's at times have become very strenuous, I'll say. But I think I can, you know, was successful in regular open dialogue and communications, which is important. And, you know, Yale's being cited in New Haven, that's a marriage from which divorce is not an option. They're always going to be there. But we need to make it work as well as possible. And I would be the first mayor on the corporation since Kurt Smoke, the former mayor, then former mayor of Baltimore, served some 10 or 15 years ago. So I think I bring, and then also as mayor, I managed a budget. It was always balanced. We didn't raise tuition or property taxes to, we've raised them a couple of times, but not very often in 16 years, to provide the essential services that are needed. And the Yale Corporation, I think you need to remember what it is. It's the body that elects the president of the university. It's the body that approves or disapproves tenure for each Yale faculty member who may be put up for tenure. It's the body that approves the budget or changes the budget or sets the priorities for the university. And when you consider that our endowment and our budget is huge, the endowment some $27 billion, and the budget several $1 billion, that's real money. And it deserves thoughtful and probing consideration. And I think also the fact that, that the process is not open. For example, we both pointed out that the minutes of the Yale Corporation meetings are embargoed. That is, they're withheld from public view for 50 years. That's 5-0. There is no rational answer that justifies that type of secrecy. This is not the CIA. These are not Korean War secrets. These are the deliberations of the university, and they should be made public to the alumni. So as I campaign, one of my first, if elected, goals will be, is to pave the way for letting the successor, and by that I mean successor alumni trustees, have an easier shot at running than Maggie and I are having by reducing the number of signatures required to qualify. My view is any alumnus of Yale University should be eligible. That's what, in fact, actually, ones who are not even 5 years out should be eligible to run. They might not be able to vote for themselves, but they should be. Nothing says they can't serve. It just says they can't vote for themselves. And I would say, and then if you want to have a runoff provision, that is, if 12 or 13 people run, have a runoff between the top two if someone doesn't get 51%. But have it a true alumni choice. Right now, while it says alumni elect, the truth is the Yale Alumni Nominating Committee elects. They put forward two choices. That is a 12 or 13 member committee. In looking at its membership, all but one member are between the classes of 1979 and 1991. So that's 12 years in which you are apparently eligible to serve on the nominating committee, but 1991 is the most recent. So that's 29 years ago. So you have to be a graduate of Yale for 29 years before you're even eligible to be on the nominating committee. And then if you're before the year of 79, like 67 or 70, I guess you're put out to pasture because you're too old. Either way, it's wrong. There shouldn't be age discrimination, either based on youth or based on being elderly or older. It should be based on what you stand for and what you bring to the deliberations of the Yale Corporation, and making sure that Yale University is as well operated as it can be, is fair to all parties, students, faculty, administrators, employees, across the board. And frankly, I think if Yale alumni actually had a free shot at running, instead of having less than 13% of the Yale alumni voting, in the last election just a couple of months ago, 87% of all Yale alumni stayed home. They didn't vote. And that was actually better than the previous year, which it was 7% less. And up until this year, Yale had never even released the number of Yale alumni who actually voted. Even today, they won't tell you the votes that Carlos Marino and Laurie McInnes received. Those were the two candidates. They won't tell you whether one of them got 10,000, the other got 8,000, or what it was. It's a secret. And the answer given was, well, it might be embarrassing to the loser. Now, I don't think, Maggie and I ended up being the two candidates. One of us won't win. I won't be embarrassed if I don't win. I'll be disappointed, but I won't be embarrassed. I don't think Maggie would be embarrassed. I think both of us ought to be commended for having the wherewithal to get up and chug up this hill and take on the powers that be and say, we want change. So with that, I'd look forward to questions that Declan has, as well as others who may be on the program.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Victor. So in turning to the next section of our conversation today, I'll ask a few questions to both Maggie and Victor, and then we'll turn it over to the alumni community and the Yale Club community that we have on the call. So the first question that I'd like to ask, and we'll start with Maggie and then move to Victor, is that, like you said, since Yale alumni haven't won an election like this since the 60s, I think you'd be walking into a board situation where members might not be so happy to have you there. So how would you deal with the dynamic on the corporation as you're elected in an election that would be historic since 1960?
Well, I guess I would say that no one ever runs for an election thinking that 100% of the people in the elected body, of which they would assume, will agree with them. So I think it is totally okay. Ultimately, it is the alumni that will be electing, hopefully either Victor or I to this seat. And that is what we will be there to do, is to represent the alumni. And that's exactly what I would intend to do, is represent the alumni. While it is a very significant hurdle to try to collect the nearly 4,400 signatures of Yale alumni, it also means that there are at least 4,400 alumni out there who support the campaigns that we are here to talk about and want to see change on the Yale Corporation. And I think that's the really important thing to keep in mind here, is that the candidates that the university is putting up, they don't have to collect any signatures. They don't have to show any support from the Yale alumni community about their platform. Not that you know what their platform is anyway, but let's say they did have a platform. Yale alumni wouldn't have anything to say about it. But the beauty of going through the petition process that Victor and I are entering in and experiencing right now is exactly that, is that, the Yale alumni, we are communicating, and I am communicating with Yale alumni on a day-to-day basis. I am getting feedback. I am hearing what people think, what they want to see changed, and what they are so proud of as part of their time at Yale and now being Yale alums. So I think it's actually a really exciting opportunity to go about it the way that we are. Certainly, nearly 4,400 signatures is absolutely a lot. But I think if either Victor or I are successful, when we are successful in our petition, and if we are successful in the election itself, I think that the board is likely going to really embrace us because we are there to represent the alumni.
Well, just to follow up on what Maggie said, and she articulated it very well, is if one of us are elected, it's a seismic change. It's the first time in 55 years that someone on the petition route was elected since William Horowitz. And I think it says a strong, strong message. And remember, if each of us get 4,400 votes, not all of them were the same. I mean, you can vote for both of us to be nominated, or some people may vote only for Maggie and not for me, or only for me and not for Maggie. My guess is it probably represents 6,000 or 7,000 of individual Yale alumni, which is one of the few opportunities that Yale alumni actually get to voice their views. When these rules were set up to establish how you run for the alumni office, we weren't consulted. Yale alumni were never consulted. It was an in-house group on the Yale Corporation, 10 of whom are answerable to no one but themselves because they can perpetuate themselves on the Yale Corporation. And they consulted no one except how can we make this difficult so the two people we do choose based on 12 years of Yale classes, but forget the other 60 years, can be assured of being elected. And there was a ballot case in 2002 when an African-American minister named David Lee actually did get on the ballot, but the Yale administration worked hard and came up with a candidate named Maya Lin, American Vietnamese architect who had designed the Vietnam War Memorial, and she won by a landslide. In that case, some 40,000 people voted. Now, while that's a huge number, that too is less than half of the Yale alumni. It's about 34%, which is much better than 13%, but it falls short of being the list. Now, if I'm elected, I'm really not worried whether one or none of the other 17 trustees voted for me or not. Having been a mayor, I had a board of directors called City Council, and I didn't get to pick them. The voters of the city of Knoxville got to pick them. And sometimes they made the choice I would have favored, and sometimes they chose someone I didn't favor. So I'm used to working with people who may be opponents, but they're not enemies. And there's a difference. You work, someone may be with you on 2 or 3 key issues, but they may be against you on a couple of other issues. It's called democracy. And I would hope that the Yale Corporation would recognize immediately, whether it's Maggie or me as the new member. And by the way, as long as the Yale Corporation members are going to tell us nothing, they should not be elected, which basically means you ought to elect either Maggie or Victor as the next member of the Yale Corporation, assuming we're both on the ballot, and not seriously consider someone who keeps his views or her views a secret from the electorate. That's just not democracy. But if we are elected, I look forward to working with President Salovey and others and saying, look, the alumni have sent a message. Now, can we work with you and have a win-win to do what the alumni want or not? That's a fair, why don't we work and take the expression of people's views? Because if you don't do it, in 2021, we'll elect a new alumni representative who will have similar views to Maggie or me. And eventually we'll get 6 of us. It just seems to me common sense will prevail. These are reasonable people. One of the board members is the governor of Rhode Island. She's used to dealing with people that don't always agree. I think she would have no problem working with either of us. And I think, frankly, others would would have the same situation. I think to some degree they are shielded from contact with Yale. I know they're told, for example, don't call the dean of a college, don't call a particular professor without going through the administration. That's ridiculous. If I'm elected to the corporation, I want to meet with the dean of the School of Art and Architecture or law or medicine, I'm going to feel free to pick up the phone and call them. And something tells me they'd be happy to meet with a member of the Yale Corporation. It's not that I'm going behind anyone's back. I don't think my phone calls need to be filtered through the Yale administration.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victor. So I'll ask one more question before turning it over to the alumni. And since both you and Maggie have highlighted your desire to represent all Yale alumni, and as an alumni trustee that's elected, I think you'd be the most public face for all alumni. How would you go about representing alumni with such diverse views as Clarence Thomas to Sonia Sotomayor? How do you balance, how do you represent people that you vehemently disagree with on a political and philosophical basis? I'll start with you, Victor, and then we'll go to Maggie.
All right. Well, first of all, let me say, I think it's great that Yale has distinguished graduates, such as the two you just named, who represent very diverse views. You know, it's well known that Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Justice Scalia, the late Justice Scalia, were best buddies. They went to the opera together. They were fast friends. Now, did they have similar views and when it came to writing opinions? No, we all know that. But again, I go back to the statement, because someone's your opponent, meaning having different views, that doesn't mean they have to be your enemy. And there's a big difference. I think I can reach out and in representing alumni. First of all, you listen. A lot of issues, excuse me, I swallowed wrong, are, shall we say, contentious. There are a variety of views. There's not unanimity. But what is important is that even people on the losing side feel they were listened to. And I've spent a lot of time, having been a mayor, listening to people that probably didn't care for me at all. But I thought it was important to listen to them. So, you know, when I say representing alumni, you don't do it by just taking a poll, but you listen carefully. And that's one of the problems right now, is there's no listening. Tell me the last time the Yale Corporation or the alumni members reached out to Yale alumni and said, what do you think about this? Share your views with us. We're going to have a couple of town hall meetings or Zoom meetings, or come to the Yale campus a day or two early and meet with students and faculty. That doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen. But it, you know, it can happen, and it should happen. Apologize for having a sore throat.
Not at all. Thank you.
And it's not the virus.
Thank you, Victor. Maggie, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, you know, I completely agree with what a lot of Victor was saying here. So certainly don't want to repeat his answer, because I agree with all of it here. But, you know, one of the beautiful things about Yale is it's a intergenerational community. Of course, there are going to be disagreements among the class of 2020 and, you know, the class of 1955. I was phone banking and, you know, have been speaking to Yale alumni across generations. And I can assure you that their experience at Yale has been incredibly different. And every time when I speak to alumni, I hear about a different experience and I hear them out. And I think that's really, really what the goal of, you know, my campaign is about, is of course to bring more young voices to the Board of Trustees. But it's also to think about, you know, how do we represent more accurately a broad swath of alumni who have, you know, of course, a wide range of beliefs and views. How is it, you know, how are we going to change the way that transparency and accessibility permeate the Yale Corporation? So right now, the Yale Corporation meets for 1 hour per year with the undergraduate college council and the graduate student senate. They get 1 hour per year to cover their issues. Quite frankly, I do not think that's enough for the governing board of the institution to be meeting, with students for such a short amount of time every year. There's no way to contact them, as Victor is saying. Why not create open lines of communication? Why not say, hey, I'm going to hold a town hall and I want to hear what you have to say? Ultimately, when you sit on a board like this, it is an exercise in listening. You are there to represent a group of people. Of course, you want to have your own leadership, bring your own leadership and have your own views, just like I do, just like, which is why I'm running this campaign. It's why I believe so strongly that Yale indeed should be a leader in our fight against climate change, that it should bring more young voices to the table. This is an institution, after all, that primarily hosts young people, lest we forget. So, I think it's really important to think about exactly how the governance structures are set up so that we can better represent the whole host of views and ideas across the Yale alumni.
Absolutely. Thank you, Maggie. So I'll open it up to the Yale alumni on the call for questions. Does anyone have questions for Victor or Maggie?
I'm bringing everyone in to the discussion here so they can see everyone.
Thank you very much, Mark.
I've got a question. This is Tyler Godoff. Should I fire away, Declan?
Go ahead, fire away.
All right. Thank you to both of you for taking the time to meet with us here in Fort Worth and just to campaign. It does not seem like an easy exercise, and it's obviously driven by passion. So that is the genesis of my question. I'd be interested to know from each of you, is there, if possible, is there a defining moment in your Yale experience that is giving you that extra pep in the step to get on that extra call or Zoom session to continue with this campaign? I'd be interested to hear that.
Well, I can tell you, having been an undergraduate, I'll let you know a secret. My grades were the gentleman C category because I didn't really, while my degree is a BA in history, my real degree was a degree in journalism from the Yale Daily News. Because for 4 years, in fact, former Senator Joe Lieberman was the chairman of the Yale Daily News my freshman year. And I got a real education being a reporter for the Yale Daily News for the 4 years I was there. I ended up being the political editor the year when Lanny Davis, who ultimately worked with the Clinton White House, was the chairman. And why it was a defining moment was it gave me entree to all the events on the Yale campus where particularly visiting people came. There was a movie actor named Ronald Reagan who came. There was an unemployed former vice president named Richard Nixon who came recruiting people for his law firm. There were, many Yale graduates, who were holding public office. John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky, a leading moderate and former ambassador to India and to East Germany. And the Yale Daily News was read. I'm sure it's read now as well, but it was a factor, and it sometimes published information that the powers that be at Woodbridge Hall weren't all that excited about. In fact, would have preferred not, but they had no control over it as to what was put out. But so really it opened the world to me in a way that living in Knoxville, Tennessee wouldn't have. And it really inspired to a large degree my career in public service. And I regard this quest, if I'm successful, but even if I'm not successful, just the fact that we're awakening people and alerting people to a process. Most Yale alumni don't even know about the secrecy and the hurdles that exist to get on the Yale Corporation. They're not informed. And Yale's policy today is they're not writing about Maggie and me. This isn't happening in their mind. It doesn't exist. And yet they're paying $40,000 or $50,000 a year to employ the Election Services Corporation to count the ballots. So Yale dollars are being spent, but in a way that, and and some 3,500 Yale alumni have signed petitions, but we don't know about it.
Thank you, Victor. Maggie, same question to you.
Great. Yeah, it's a really good question and something I think a lot about. I certainly look back very fondly on my time at the School of Forestry, now School of the Environment. I'm still getting used to saying that. And you know, I really think, to cut to the chase, you know, my time at the School of the Environment really jump-started my career. You know, I went to the School of Forestry because I knew I wanted to work in climate and the environment. I knew I wanted to work in politics. I didn't have, you know, a particular area of climate or energy or environment issues that I wanted to be, you know, the end-all be-all expert in. But I knew that I wanted to work at the highest levels of government, and I knew I wanted to work on this issue because I cared deeply about it, and I cared deeply about, you know, our future planet and also our future communities. And during my time at Yale, you know, I was, much like Victor is saying, exposed to just the climate leaders, to end all and be all climate leaders. I mean, it was the most impressive and the most persuasive and influential folks who work, you know, up and down government, in the private sector, in the nonprofit sector. And ultimately, my summer internship, I ended up working directly for the President's Environmental Advisor at the Council on Environmental Quality. So got to be a White House intern. I met and watched soccer with Barack Obama, which was pretty cool. There's a picture online of that, which was pretty fun. And, you know, I think ultimately I made relationships, and my classmates became my colleagues. And now when I think about, you know, who are the most influential players, who are the rising stars, who's making the most change in the space that I currently work in, it's my FES classmates. And as I, you know, worked on a presidential campaign, it involved a lot of late nights, it involved a lot of last minute phone calls and emails and text messages. And those all went to, you know, my classmates. And I think, you know, I credit them very deeply for helping me and supporting me over the last year in my jobs that I had. Certainly working on a presidential campaign, a lot of people tell you what they don't like about what they're doing. So back on the earlier note, certainly I have fielded much inquiry and feedback working on a presidential campaign. So, you know, I think that's really it for me. It's definitely the thing that motivates me is thinking about, you know, the role and the change and the impact that that my time at FES had on me. And I feel very deeply and care a lot about making Yale this place that I want to see in the future.
Terrific. Thank you, Maggie. Are there additional questions from the alumni community we have on the call? Well, I'll ask another one if there's no additional questions or no questions from the alumni community. What do you think are some of Yale's most recent successes, and what are some of the areas where Yale could improve? Maggie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So, look, I mean, I think it is no secret I am running this campaign in part because I think that Yale can and should be a climate leader. So I think that is absolutely an area where it can improve. You know, the university has currently said that it will be carbon neutral by 2050, but some of Yale's own research scientists, who are the leading climate scientists in this world, have said that that's not soon enough. And so I think a big part of this campaign that I'm running is to try to bring Yale and make Yale be a carbon neutral campus by 2030 and really be a test bed and a living laboratory for what does it mean to decarbonize. You know, I think a university is like a small city. If we can do this at Yale, we can do this around the world, and we can make the change that we want to see. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about running this campaign. And I think so many alumni are as well. Is, you know, how can we make Yale this climate leader? You know, a moral leader, an academic leader in every aspect and facet of what we think of as, you know, we need to transition to 100% clean energy.
I think like many institutions, there are always pluses and there are minuses. The pluses are, I think, Yale offers a quality education to those persons who are admitted to it. Obviously, some 90 some odd percent of the applicants do not get into Yale, and it's a small group. But Yale still offers and is seen as a institution that young American students and foreign students, for that matter, want to attend, as was the case in my day. And I think Yale still instills a sense of public service. I failed to mention in the earlier case, when I was there between 63 and 67, for the first 2 years, Yale students, not actually encouraged necessarily by the university, were extremely active in the civil rights movement in Mississippi and Alabama. And when students literally, including people like Joe Lieberman, took off from Yale and drove all night or day and a half to Jackson, Mississippi to assist African Americans in getting the right to vote and in integrating buses and Greyhound buses, and might add, at some considerable risk to themselves personally. Then as time moved along, obviously towards the end of our time there was the start of the Vietnam War. And while actually it started earlier, that was when more and more people were being drafted under President Johnson. And that's when the earlier demonstrations occurred. Now, at the time I left, there were further demonstrations, obviously, in New Haven and in the city that, again, was part of the fabric of Yale University. But I think the fact that Yale students have been drawn to express their views, whether in civil rights or the Vietnam War or climate change or other issues as time progresses and the issues evolve, is a plus in terms of service. I think the fact that so many people with Yale degrees are in public service today and always have been. I mean, 3 of our presidents are Yale graduates. 2 may have been a father and a son, but that's happened with the Adams family as well. But the point is, we are building men and women, molding them to be leaders of the United States and other countries as well. And we should be proud of that and need to continue. I think the areas of failure are, frankly, some of the things we're talking about. Why the secrecy? Why not more openness? How can you advocate on Black Lives Matter to have more openness when you run an operation yourself that's anything but open? You need to be consistent with having openness. I actually believe in it across the board. When I was mayor in the state legislature, I sponsored bills to mandate open records be made public if people wanted to see them. Meetings had to be public of governmental bodies and boards and commissions. I think these are things where there are shortcomings, and part of a campaign is to educate the electorate as to what is wrong, but how it can be corrected. We're not running against Yale. We're running for Yale. We're running for Yale to be the best it can be. And I think whether either one of us will be a step forward for the Yale Corporation. And I might say, by the way, while the alumni get to elect 6 members, the successor trustees, apparently they choose among themselves, but that violates the rules. In other words, the entire corporation has to choose the successor trustees. That means alumni trustees get to vote. And there's no reason one of the successor trustees can't be a much younger person. There was a day 30 years ago when a man named Strobe Talbot, then in his 30s, they actually said we need younger people. So they elected him. I don't know whether he was 37 or 38, but that was one of the few times they had someone in their 30s elected. And I think he was regarded as a very able successor. And certainly if you're looking for diversity, it's not just gender and ethnic background, but it's all, or geography, but it's also age. And there's no reason that one of the successor trustees, alumni where they're elected, the elector will vote for who they want to vote for. But in the successor area, if you don't have any young trustees, there's no reason, and every year 1 or 2 of them come up, you can't insist that you look at younger people.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victor. So I'll go ahead and pause there and open it up from questions from the alumni on the call again. Any questions from the larger body?
I think the membership is voting for you, Declan, to ask questions.
Absolutely. Well, I can continue. Something that I'm interested in is getting both candidates' perspective on intellectual freedom and freedom of speech. What role does freedom of speech and intellectual diversity play at Yale in the next 6 years and in the 21st century? Maggie, let's start with you.
Yeah, so look, the way I think about it is free speech is not a Democratic versus Republican issue, right? This is a right that we have to preserve, including on college campuses. And all of us who believe in America and believe in its freedoms need to make sure that powerful institutions and individuals don't shut down speech because they don't like it, and that includes universities. That said, free speech does not entitle the speaker to an audience. And free speech does not mean that you have the right to remain silent when someone is saying hurtful or disparaging things about women or people of color or anybody else. Students have the power to make their voices heard, and free speech means more speech. And colleges, should sponsor debates. They should enable student groups to invite guests. All of this is exactly what should be going on, on a college campus. They should be promoting this marketplace of ideas. As an alumni fellow trustee, that's exactly what I intend to do. I'm very committed to ensuring robust debate on college campuses. After all, I do work in politics, so this is not something that is new to me. A theme of my campaign is the idea that more ideas and more voices lead to stronger governance, and I would say this is an area that's no different.
It seems to me freedom of speech and the diversity of ideas is essential to the success and the intellectual quality of an institution of higher learning, particularly Yale University, one of the top universities in the world, not just the United States. And there should never be any diminution. Now, if you have someone coming espousing unpopular views, it may be that he or she doesn't have a very large audience. But I don't think they should have an audience that boos them to the point that they can't speak either. I remember when I was mayor of the city of Knoxville, the KKK got a permit. We had to issue it to them to have a march. And obviously this presented me as mayor with a difficult situation. Difficult in the sense I found their views to be abhorrent and reprehensible. But on the other hand, I couldn't deny them the right to march. So I issued a statement saying, we're doing what the Constitution, the First Amendment requires, but to my fellow citizens, I suggest you not attend or show up. They want a crowd. Don't give them a crowd. Let the police outnumber the people there. And I'm happy to say that they marched down the main street of the city, and I think maybe 17 people showed up, which was more people than they had in their own parade. And as a result, they never came back. And there are ways of handling this if people have repugnant views. But the issue should be, can we have members of the Supreme Court come and who maybe some people didn't want confirmed, but they were confirmed, they are members, and speak to the university and be appropriately received. If you don't agree with them, just, you don't have to applaud them. But it's important that that people recognize that Yale is a place that you can speak and voice your views and not be hounded because you did.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Maggie. I think I have one or two more questions before we wrap up. And so I'd like to understand your thoughts on the tenure process. How would you approach tenure recommendations from the faculty body, seeing as that's one of the most important jobs of a corporation member? Victor, let's start with you.
Well, I would certainly take it seriously. And, again, I've never been on the corporation. I don't know if they come in batches of 20 or 30 or 5 or 10 or what material comes with it. I assume if they put forward Bill Smith, I'm making up names, that there must have some information as to why Mr. Smith, after so many years at Yale, should have tenure and why. And I'd want to look at it and thoughtfully consider it and be able to ask questions as to, if something popped up that raised questions in mind. But remember, if you get tenure, that's a guaranteed job, barring misbehavior at an important institution. I believe in tenure. I think tenure is an important part of an academic environment. On the other hand, you also have to look at it from the standpoint of cost, because once you guarantee someone has something, there is a cost to it in terms of employment. So I think you take it one by one. You would be heavily influenced, but I assume there's a committee that recommends. They don't come to you, except I assume the president recommends that, a certain number of professors be given tenure, and you listen carefully. If you had opposition or learned something about them that maybe the committee had overlooked, then you should have a right to ask questions. I do know for a fact that sometimes tenure recommendations have been delayed to the next meeting. That is, so board members can get board. And depending on who it is, that may be appropriate. So I know we really answered it in a general way, but I would take it seriously, and I would not be a rubber stamp and simply because it was recommended, I'm going to vote yes. I would value that, but if I had additional information, I'd feel free to ask the questions.
Thank you very much, Victor. Maggie, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and seems like the tree cutting equipment just started across the street. So if there's too much background noise, I will get up and move. Sorry if I was looking around there. Look, again, similarly, I think it is important for a board and an oversight board, for the board that's setting strategic priorities for the university to consider a holistic approach when they're looking at tenureship, for example. And, looking across the board, what is the overall diversity of the professors that we're granting tenure? Not just diversity in gender, not just diversity in race, but also in, certainly in diversity of ideas. Are, majors that are, for example, like environmental sciences currently has no tenured professors. So majors that are wildly popular at the university, does the number of tenured faculty match the number of students that are, for example, taking those classes and interested in that subject? And I think that's the kind of sort of strategic value and oversight that is important for members of the Yale Corporation to think about as they're considering these decisions. And again, that type of oversight can only happen if the makeup of the board itself also represents that same kind of diversity. And that's exactly what we're talking about here today, is that diversity doesn't exist.
Thank you very much, Maggie. So seeing that we're coming up upon the hour, why don't we finish up with some closing statements? Maggie, since you kicked us off, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Sorry, I thought you were going to say, why don't I go second?
Oh, good question. Good question.
Sorry, closing statements?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted to say thanks again for everyone for being here. Of course, always thank you to Victor for joining me on these events. Victor and I have seen each other quite regularly these days. Appreciate you all being so engaged. I think this is really important. Institutions like Yale have the power to change public dialogue and discourse. They have the power to, invent the next moonshot technology. They have the power to change the world. And I think it is incredibly important as alumni that we stay engaged in this process and make sure that Yale's governance is representative of the university that we want to see. So you can learn more about my campaign at yaleforward.org. You can also sign the petition directly from there. I will add that you can sign the petition for both Victor and I. So you just have to submit the form twice. There's a drop-down menu and you have to select each of our names each time. But hopefully you are compelled by what you heard today, and really appreciate you all taking the time.
Well, let me just say I've enjoyed getting to know Maggie. Someday I'll get to actually meet her, but I've been on these programs, and I like what I see and I like what I hear. In terms of my own campaign, you can go to ashforyale.com, and again, from there you can directly go to the website to cast your vote online. Sometimes it becomes a little difficult because if your current address doesn't match up with what the Yale Alumni Association has, then they reject it and you have to be determined and keep going back. That may be a time when you want to fill out a paper ballot and send it to either Maggie or me, or whoever you, to the Yale Services Corporation, to vote that way. That's your choice. But the important thing is that you participate and get the word out that this is going on. If you want to be able to have candidates for the Yale Corporation who will actually tell you what they think and will be open to dialogue, then you either vote for Maggie or me or both of us, because you sure won't come from the Yale Corporation and that 12-member nominating committee that, as a condition of being nominated, you take a pledge not to talk about anything, which is somewhat insulting. I mean, Yale University and its governance doesn't let them voice their views. I'm surprised they even agreed to it. You know, I would never agree to it. And I think that's significant. And hopefully this is the last time that will occur, that if one of us gets on the board, they will drop that silly requirement. They'll drop the requirement for 4,400 signatures. They'll repeal the 50-year moratorium on releasing minutes, and they'll bring the Yale Corporation into this century. And, you know, and I would encourage you to tell your friends, Yale's not going to tell you, but tell your friends that this is going on. And we've got 10 more weeks till midnight on October 1 to get us across the finish line and to reach that magic 4,400. Probably need 4,500 in case a couple of ballots are disqualified. But it's been a great campaign. It's still a ways to go. I hope there'll be other Yale clubs that will have meetings such as this. And by the way, when if it turns out we're both on the ballot, I hope you do these again.
Absolutely. I think the Fort Worth Club would appreciate the opportunity to meet with you both. And thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. It's been great talking about Yale and talking about ideas. As some of the participants may have seen, Mark Carr has put both links into the address, and then I'm more than happy to send them out to the panelists and to all the attendees if that would be helpful. For Victor and Maggie, we've recorded the call, and I'll make sure to send you both a link. But thank you very much for taking the time to join us here and to share your ideas with the Yale Club of Fort Worth.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's been a pleasure. Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.